So, welcome to Women of Valor Week 9. This day we are studying Abigail. So, in the past few weeks, we have been indirectly talking about God's timing and how crucial it is to be in line with God's timing. This was extremely true for Sarah as she waited 90 years to have her only child. True for Rachel and Rebecca as they reached the town's well in time for Abraham's servant and Jacob to arrive. The timing for Rebecca hearing her husband give instruction to Esau before receiving the blessing, his final blessing. The timing that Tamar had as she received the word that her father-in-law was coming into town and traveling through and then placing herself on the side of the road to his destination. The timing of Jael, who was present at her tent when Sisera came by seeking to be hid and hiding from Barak and Deborah. And as he lost his life under the hand of her hammer and tent peg, even Naomi's timing, returning back to her homeland in time for the harvest so that Ruth can meet Boaz. And how can we forget Miriam and her timing in helping to provide her mother as a wet nurse to Moses after Pharaoh's daughter plucked him out of the Nile? It is all about timing. And now Abigail. So there's a scripture that I kept seeing and hearing as I was studying her, and it's Proverbs 25:15. And that's through patience, one can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. Now, I actually had this conversation with somebody about a week ago that, having so much anger or rage in response to someone never really gets anything done. And so when you whisper, people lean in. Right? They draw to you. But when you yell, they lean back. So that is something that we can take into account as women of valor, as we study the women of the Bible and look at their examples for us. But this is definitely true in the story of Abigail. So who was Abigail? Anybody want to add to that question? Who did you find Abigail to be as you did some research?
The Proverbs 31 woman.
Definitely. Care to elaborate on which parts?
I mean, so many. She was quick to act. She saved her household. She saved David also committing sin. Um, Wisdom, beauty, discernment.
Yeah, a woman of discernment, one that could be trusted with important decisions, right? Swift to think and make decisions. Uh, she was a woman of courage and action in the face of extremely real danger. She spoke with wisdom. She bore the weight of others' sins on her shoulders. She was patient with her husband, seeking out a wise time to try to speak with him, with someone whose name translated to fool, right? And this was a woman of faith. That
And she
is,
was and she was also a giving woman. She gave. You saw how she said she had food and water and animals, and she gave of her wealth to David,
yeah, she
and
did.
she gave plentiful.
She did. She did. Again, like she's such an amazing example for us to study.
And it,
So
also that the helpers came to her.
yes, that's why I said she could be trusted with decision because they came seeking her hand to resolve what was going on.
Yeah, save us.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so that's something for us to ask ourselves when everything is going astray. Do people look for us? Or do we look for somebody else? Like, can we be trusted with what needs to be done? And not every circumstance, we meet the criteria of solving. But if it is in our power, if it is in our wheelhouse, and God has placed us in a position to be of assistance and of use, then are we taking action into that? I like to think of Abigail as an instrument of deliverance because of this story. She's an instrument of deliverance, and that is a characteristics of a godly woman, the characteristics of a godly woman, because she embodied who Jesus came to be on the cross, right? Someone who delivers us from sin, delivers us from what we have done. And that's what she did. Like Jesus died on the cross for other people's sins. She got down in front of David for her husband's sin. and said, I take the weight on me. Deliver these men, put it on me.
Yes, she said, I'll take the blame.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
matter of fact, well, I don't want to go ahead, but
Yeah, no worries. So what I want to do is, as always, read through the scripture. So we're going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 25, beginning at verse 2. I'll give you guys a moment to get there, and then we will read. It is a pretty lengthy chapter, and I tend to read quickly, but we're going to go through it thoroughly. So I'll give you guys a second to get there. All right, it says, beginning at verse 2, New King James Version. Now there was a man in Maon whose business and possessions were in Carmel. And the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was intelligent and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings. He was a Calebite, a descendant of Caleb, right? David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And this is what you shall say, have a long life. He's blessing him. Peace be to you, and peace to your house, and peace to all that you have. Blessings upon blessings, right? Now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not harmed them, nor were they missing anything all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. He's asking for witnesses, right? Therefore, let my young men find favor in your sight and be well treated, for we have come on a good festive day. Please give whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son David. And when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to these words in the name of David. Then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today, each of whom is breaking away from his master. So should I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to men when I do not know where they are from? So David's young men made their way back and returned. And they came and told him everything that was said to them by Nabal. David said to his men, each man, put on your sword. So each man put on his sword. David also put on his sword, and about 400 men went up behind David, while 200 stayed back with the provisions and supplies. But one of Nabal's young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, listen, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to bless and greet our master, and he shouted at them in contempt. But David's men were very good to us, and we were not harmed or treated badly. He's giving witness, right? Nor did we miss anything as long as we were with them when we were in the fields. They were a wall of protection to us both day and night, all the time that we were with them tending the sheep. Now then, know this and consider what you should do. He's giving her the hey, we need your help, right? He said, for evil is already planned against our master and against all his household. But he is such a worthless and wicked man that no one can speak reasonably to him. Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 jugs of wine, 5 sheep already prepared for roasting, 5 measures of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. She said to her young men, go ahead of me, behold, I am coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. It happened that as she was riding on her donkey and coming down by the way of the hidden part of the mountain, that suddenly David and his men were coming down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, surely in vain, I have protected and guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missing of a belonging to him. And he has repaid me evil for good. May God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave alive even one male of any who belong to him. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from the donkey and kneeled face down before David and bowed down to the ground in respect. Kneeling at his feet, she said, my lord, let the blame and guilt be on me alone. And please let your maidservant speak to you and listen to the words of your maidservant. Please do not let my lord pay attention to this worthless man, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal, fool, is his name, and foolishness is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see my lord's young men whom you sent. So now, my lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, since the Lord has prevented you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be as Nabal. Now this gift which your maidservant has brought, my lord, let it be given to the young men who accompany and follow my lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make my lord a secure and enduring house, because my lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil will not be found in you all your days. Should anyone rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, then the life of my lord will be bound in the precious bundle of the living with the Lord your God. But the lives of the enemies of your enemies, those he will hurl out as from a center of a sling. And it will happen when the Lord does for my Lord according to all the good that he has promised concerning you, and appoints your ruler over Israel, that this will not cause grief or bring a troubled conscience to my Lord, both by having shed blood without cause and by my Lord having avenged himself. When the Lord deals well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me this day. And blessed be your discretion and discernment, and blessed be you who has kept me from bloodshed this day, and from avenging myself by my own hand. Nevertheless, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has prevented me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, most certainly by the morning light, there would not have been left to Nabal so much as one male. So David accepted what she had brought to him and said to her, go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to you and have granted your request. Then Abigail came to Nabal, and he was holding a feast in his house for the shears, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's mood was joyous because he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. But in the morning, when Nabal was sober and his wife told him these things, his heart died within him, and he became paralyzed and helpless like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, blessed be the Lord, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach at the hand of Nabal, and has kept his servant from retaliating with evil. For the Lord has returned the wickedness of Nabal on his own head. Then David sent word to Abigail, proposing to take her as his wife. When the servants of David had come to Abigail in Carmel, they said to her, David sent us to you to take you to him to be his wife. And she stood and bowed with her face to the ground and said, behold, your maidservant is ready to be a maid to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. Then Abigail quickly got up and rode on a donkey with 5 of her maidens who attended her. And she followed the messengers of David and became his wife. David had also taken Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both became his wives. So that is the entire story that we know of Abigail. There's a little bit of genealogy in the book of Numbers that alludes to her, but this is her entire story. I want you guys to understand Abigail is listed as a prophet among Miriam and Huldah and Deborah and Hannah and Sarah and Esther. And that's found in Jewish writings of the Torah. So, and you'll
And
see
why
that.
was she listed as a prophet?
I'll get into that and you'll see it. You may have missed it, but it was right there in the scripture. And again, like sometimes you gotta, I personally, I read over these things 15, 20 times, if not more, and then listen to the different versions and do a little more research. And
Oh, well, I think okay, yeah, because
yep,
she said, yep.
exactly. I'm glad you picked up on that. So we're first introduced to Abigail in verse 3 of this chapter, and we know that she's married to a wealthy man whose name translates to fool. Money is not everything. Nope. You can be a wealthy fool, right? And that's what he was. This man had wealth, but it was clear through the scriptures that he was not well respected. His men respected and trusted Abigail to do what was right. And so after being made known of the predicament, of her predicament of being married to a wealthy fool, we're told that she is quite the opposite. She was considered very intelligent and easy on the eyes, right? She was beautiful. How nice. One thing that I want to point out is that David and Nabal were distant cousins. They were both of the line of Judah, right? So in the last 9 generations, they shared Judah as their great, 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 great granddaddy. David and Nabal were both well known. There's no mistaking that. Nabal was known for his great flocks, his land, and all that he had. And you'll see again shortly. And it's important to know who David and Nabal were when discussing Abigail, because she was the one person who prevented an entire slaughter. And if you're not familiar with David's story, at this time of his life, his father-in-law, King Saul, had been trying to kill him and hunt him down over jealousy for quite some time. But David recognized that even though Saul had gone astray from the Lord, he was still God's anointed. So let's pause right here for a moment and recognize that God's favor can still be on your life when you're looking in the other direction, right? So David was well known, not just in his relation to the king and in the battles that he fought and won, but whole songs were written about him in honor of his victories, which ironically is what created the jealousy that Saul had. So even if both these men did not know each other on a familial level because they were both descendants of Judah, they still knew about each other. You definitely heard about them.
David was well known.
Very well known. Very well known. So now it was the custom. Go ahead.
God looks the end from the beginning. You know, it's reversed. So
yep. So it was custom in this time that if someone protected your flocks from harm, you repaid them for their kindness. And so begins a situation in which Abigail is thrust into in our biblical history book. So we read about how David sent 10 young men to Nabal, reminding him of what his 600 men did to keep his 4,000 flock safe. It's almost a tenth, right? If it was 400 men, now granted, he took 400 men with him on his way back, right? That's a tenth of the size of the flock that he has. And in his message to Nabal that we read that David gave, David was a man in charge of 600 and honored Nabal and simply asked, whatever you can spare for our efforts. He didn't demand anything, and he didn't give a quota and said, this is what I'm asking for, send me 10 of this and 50 of that. He said, whatever you can spare, this is what we're asking. So the message that Nabal responded with was pretty much saying that David was no different than the next person who left their master and came looking for food. He was completely disrespectful in his response. And David had witnesses, as you saw, of what his men did for Nabal. Not only did they bring that up or they wanted to bring it up to Nabal, but they went and told Abigail, yeah, this is true. This is what David did for us. So Nabal's shepherds and men, they heard the interaction between between Nabal and David's 10 men. And they did the only thing they thought they could do. They went to Abigail. So the shepherds themselves could not provide rightly for David's men. That wasn't theirs to own, that wasn't theirs to hand out. But Abigail was an intelligent woman, and this probably wasn't the first time they went to her to resolve Nabal's problems. Not at all. She had some serious discernment.
Right.
So a few weeks ago, we studied on Deborah, the prophetess, and the judge of Israel. And if you remember, Deborah had so much discernment that people would climb a mountain to plead their case in front of her because they knew that she was fair. They knew that she had God's calling on her life. And in a similar matter, the affairs of Nabal were brought to his wife. Nabal was obviously not a man of his word, nor cared for tradition. But the men knew that this type of behavior could cost all of them their lives. So let's look at the actions of Abigail, because she's the star of our show today, right? When truth is spoken to her concerning everyone in their household, she rushes to grab 200 loaves of bread, 2 jugs of wine, 5 sheep already prepared for roasting, 5 measures of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 fig cakes, and loaded them on donkeys. Now understand that they already had to be laying around because she was moving fast. This is how wealthy they are. She had, my favorite part, right? 200 loaves of bread sitting there ready. Always my favorite. You're not going to go wrong with bread with me. So, not just laying around, but this is what she could take without even being a noticeable dent in what their own provisions, right? I can say this because it tells us clearly that Nabal had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, right? That's what we know about. So she was bringing them 5 sheep. That's not much at all. David simply asked for what could be spared, and she was honoring his request without, quote unquote, breaking the bank. So, plus again, she had to act quickly. She was trying to put out a fire. What are your thoughts about Abigail in this moment? Receiving a word like this of this David and his renowned army are pretty much coming to slaughter all your men because your husband's at it again. And that weight feeling like it's like on your shoulders.
Well,
How would you respond?
she was quick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she was definitely God's instrument.
Now, how would you respond? Because again, she did this privately without asking her husband first.
I probably would panic. Well, if she panicked, but she worked fast, probably.
She was saving lives here. She wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about all those others involved, even though what she did was wrong because she took, what wasn't hers. It was her husband. And then she also talked about him, calling him a fool. That wasn't good either.
Well, that was his name, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know.
So, but
But
yes.
you're not supposed to be bad mouthing your husband.
No, but she was speaking truth. But yeah,
No.
you're right. There's a fine line between you're speaking truth and being disrespectful, right?
Right. She was trying to put out a fire.
Yeah.
That's
Put it this.
Exactly. I felt like she was a helpmate to him at that time because even though it tells us how shrewd he was known the way that I took it for the way he treated people. And by her knowing this, I mean, what can she do? This is just my husband. He's just rude to everyone. And so, like you said, I don't think this was the first time she probably interceded, but she was being a helpmate at that time by taking action, using wisdom, being directed by God to do what she felt or what she felt God told her to do to avoid this confrontation or blood being shed.
Right.
She was trying to save his life too. Little did he would
Exactly.
appreciate it.
Right.
She
And
was
also,
prepared. She was prepared because this was probably, as others said, this was not the first time that this, occurred. So she was probably stockpiling these goods, so that she knew that it's going to come again. I don't know when it's going to come again. So she was able to stockpile her reserves because she knew it would happen again. She said, yeah, you're right. Her husband was a fool. This has not been the first time he has been angry and evil towards people. So she was preparing herself for the next time that this anger, that what he would just, this visceral anger that he would come out with his family.
Right.
well, the word of God says right there in this chapter that it says he was wicked. That's his reputation.
Right.
And I think it's important also to note that in this chapter, Samuel just died, and David was grieving. Everybody was grieving.
Yeah.
Samuel was anointed David. He was grieving, and not only that, but David was hiding from Saul in the woods. All these emotions, everything happened.
Yeah. I'm glad you picked up on that. I don't know how you hide 600 men, but he did it. They were armed, they were well prepared. But like you said, he was hurting. And so his emotions were here. So he came humble before Nabal, and Nabal treated him like he was nothing, almost as if he deserved Saul seeking to kill him. when he
Mhm.
said, I don't know who you are. Anybody leaves their masters these days. He was making it a point to know that I really don't have to do anything for you because I know the king is looking to kill you. And so he was, like you said, heightened in his emotions because his mentor just died, the person who kind of instructed him, anointed him towards God's ways. Yeah, very painful time. So not only are you grieving, but you got somebody that pretty much just spit in your face for all the work that you freely did for them, when all you said was please.
All he had, David also could do, like, of course it would have took time. That if he would have just sat back and says, okay, you don't need me, and put up his hands, okay, let's see what happens when the Philistines come and try to attack you and take all your stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting mix here that we're watching. Some arrogance, some humility, and ego shift, right? Because now that you hurt the man's ego, now it's like the chest is puffed up. And here's the thing: I don't think David was concerned about a morsel of food for himself, but the 600 men that he had with him.
Yeah.
This was more about them, and I guess a bit about honor as well. So,
And that's why she directed it to the men, not to David.
Yeah. She made it about both. And I love her response because, again, you can see how she took, even though she was making it very pointedly and rushing to get there, she took her time to choose her words. So, so it's Abigail and 5 other women, her maidens, right, who sent out to encounter an army and to prevent a slaughter. Who are your 5 best female friends, right? You guys want to go encounter an army with me? No, right? That's pretty much what this is. Initially, she's hidden on her way down because of the mountain, right? But as soon as she comes within sight of David, she dismounts from her donkey and she gets down into an apologetic posture on behalf of her husband. And she pleads the case of every man in her household, as well as the case of David and his men. She is willing to intercede on her husband's behalf. Again, this is very Christ-like behavior. She humbled herself in something that had nothing to do with her, right? She interceded on the behalf of other sins. That's very Christ-like.
Took the sin on.
Right. So when we talk about a Proverbs 31 woman, this is Abigail all the way, right? Who do we intercede for when we know they're wrong and it ain't our responsibility, but we're still praying for them?
Or when do we say, give me what that they deserve?
Put the blame on me.
Yeah.
But that's the way we as women are. We've always taken that burden of,
not all the time.
Not all the time, but she took that burden on her shoulders because she knew that had history with her husband. So
Honestly,
she continued to take that burden.
Yeah. Honestly, there are some days when you see the results of someone's actions and in your mind you're like, good, but then there are some days where you're like, I wish that never happened. Even if I don't care for this person at all, I don't wish any harm or wickedness to befall anyone. And I'd rather you learned before it happened than it all play out the way it did. So, I mean, in reality, yeah, we do need to check ourselves and ask, are we interceding on behalf? Are we stepping in as Christ would have? Are we emulating Christ in our actions, in the way that we talk, in the way that we approach people, in the way that we intervene to deliver others from what is rightfully coming?
The verse that keeps on coming to me is that open your mouth and I will fill it. Because that was God speaking.
Right. Yep. Moses had a
she was a prophetess because it was God speaking to her.
Exactly. Moses had a stutter, right? He was not confident in what was coming out of his mouth. That's why his brother was pulled into the whole picture of, hey, be my mouthpiece. I'll be as God to you and you'll speak on my behalf. And like you said, open your mouth and let God speak through you. Now, I was listening to a sermon yesterday or today, and it talked about old historical ways of finding out who is the thief in your camp or who is the spy in your camp. And they would take the butt of their gun without any warning and bash it against your toes, like, ram it on the floor against your toes. And the thought is, when you're in pain and you're shocked like that, you speak in your native language. So you find out if someone is a spy from another country, right? So, I mean, that's the thing. When you get scared, when you get hurt, are you cursing? Are you speaking godly? Are you rebuking what is happening? Or is other things that are within you coming out? That's a good way to check what's going on inside. Not that I recommend you guys getting hurt or scared, but you get what I'm saying. So here we see Abigail sitting there pleading with David and asking him to just hear her out, asking that the blame be on her shoulders. She honors David by lifting him up in her speech and in her posture, right? She lowers herself, right? So she reminds David that her husband is rightly named fool, and that his actions, although he is rich, have proven him poor. She declared that if it were her that received the message, that she would have rightly responded, because she knows that the custom, and she trusts the report of the men that came to her. But in verse 26, she appeals to the godly side of David and his connection with the Almighty. So if you look at verse 26, it says, "So now, my Lord, as the Lord lives, as your soul lives, since the Lord has prevented you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal, known as a fool." She identified with David that her timing and interceding was the work of the Lord. That appealed to him. That appealed
She
to his
diffused the situation and directed him towards God.
right back to where he's supposed to keep his eyes on. Right? She blesses David and even prophesies here, saying, "Should anyone rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, then the life of my Lord will be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies, those he will hurl out from the center of a sling." She reminds David of his encounter with Goliath, right? Pretty much saying, appealing to his ego and saying, I know what you did. I know who you are. But this is actually what happens to her husband. This is why this is prophetic. Because in verse 30, prophesying again, "And it will happen when the Lord does for my Lord according to all good as he has spoken concerning you, and appoints you ruler over Israel." This happens. That this incident would have caused him grief, right? It was stopped. No blood has to be shed over this, and none was. So Nabal died without physical wound, and the men were saved.
Vengeance is mine, says the Lord.
Right, right. That's what she said. You don't have to avenge yourself. God got that. And that was kind of evident in his exchange with Saul. Every time he came close enough to Saul where he could have killed him, and he cut off a piece of his garment, or he took, an item that was next to his hand. And he says, "Look, I was close enough to end your life while you were knocked out, or while you were in the cave relieving yourself," right? But he didn't. He didn't avenge himself. He said, "I know that it says, 'Touch not my anointed.'" Nabal was not anointed, but like we talked about, David's emotions were high because Samuel just passed away. So David recognizes the discretion and discernment that Abigail showed, obviously acting without her husband's knowledge, because he says that, "I recognize your discernment and your discretion." He recognizes God's hand in the timing, saying that it was God who sent her to stop this bloodshed. And he tells her to go in peace. And she asks that he simply remember her actions. The final things that we know about Abigail is that she approaches her husband with caution. She does not keep what she had done hidden as a secret, because that's not in her character. She waits for him to be of a sober mind. And that right there is a message on its own. Like, stop approaching people during the wrong time, when they're not in the right mind, when their emotions are like, all over the place. He was drunk. He was heavily drunk, it says. And again, timing. So when Nabal is no longer drunk, she reveals her actions, and he becomes paralyzed hearing this and dies because the Lord has dealt with him for his actions. So when David receives this word that Nabal died, he sends message for Abigail, and she comes with 5 of her other maidens, possibly the same 5 that rode out with her to encounter David during his rage, right? And he takes her as wife. Now, she is known as his second first wife, and that is because Saul, who had given his daughter to David to be his wife, he took her from David and gave her to somebody else. So Abigail became his first wife again. So
when I
you know,
heard that second
second
wife,
first wife.
like it like had to mess with my head. What do you mean
Yeah.
second first wife?
Well, there was nobody else before her. So if I mean, we can look at Rachel and Leah, right? We can look at Rachel, Leah, and their maidservants, his concubines. There was only one first wife. Everyone else was an addition. So she became his first wife for the second time because his first wife was removed from him without his, without his call. Yeah.
So was that like an annulment?
Pretty much, because he was the king and he could do so.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So the purpose of these stories and us becoming familiar with them is to remind you and every other woman that comes across these recordings that a woman of valor is worth far more than rubies. And she moves under the hand of God with purpose. Some may have you believe that women have no place among men, but in all of these stories, we see how instrumental we are to every bit of the song. We see how we can make or break a situation by being in communion with our God and allowing him to be the Lord of our lives. And this is also true for men, right? A man's actions are pointless without the direction of God. And that's how we are to recognize our own value. In a mathematical equation, we come across variables, right? And that variable is an unknown entity that either adds value or subtracts, multiplies or divides. We know that God adds to our lives and multiplies what we have. In fact, he tells us in true nature to produce good fruit and to multiply. But the hand of the enemy is to steal, subtract, right? Kill and destroy. He comes to divide. So these women that we are studying, and ourselves as well, they had a choice and we have a choice. What do you want to be in your equation in your life? By the actions of Abigail, many lives and families were saved. And David's relationship with the Lord was also spared the hardship of his heart. So I find Abigail's story to be so powerful to who we are, who we can be. She emulates a Proverbs 31 woman perfectly because her husband's hand trusts her, right? And so his people trust her. They came to her with the dilemma that was going on when their lives were on the line. And like when your lives are on the line and you're going to die, you run to the safest place possible. And they ran to Abigail. And that is a Proverbs 31 woman. That is a woman of courage, a woman of valor. So hearing about the timing of everything that Abigail did and the timing of all the other women that we have discussed in the past 9 weeks, how do we apply this to our lives? How do we listen in and say, okay, Lord, I might not understand what's happening today, but I know your timing is everything. What do you guys, how do you guys see yourselves or see Abigail's actions in something that you would have done or would not have done? Especially, towards the end there, as she was somebody that helped be a deliverer, an instrument of deliverance to all the people of that land.
Like I said, I probably would have panicked, but it's good to read all these experience that these women of the Bible had, so it can, like, reading gives you wisdom, and it makes me want to, okay, I can do this, change my spirit. My spirit changes as I read the word, you know, and gives me discernment, and it's like
It's encouraging. It's encouraging because not every story that we read about is great, right? When we talk about Rachel and Leah and the battle between two siblings, we don't know what it was like for them to grow up prior to their encounter with Jacob and him being their husband. Maybe they got along great, maybe they didn't, but we know that post that marriage, it was a very difficult life for them. And so when we read about stories like that, we think, man, how could we make better decisions to not make the lives around us full of grief, full of hurt and pain. And as we saw, that Leah was buried in the tomb with Jacob and his family and his ancestors, but Rachel was not, right? So there was a lot of pain in the decisions and the outcomes that happened there. And then when we read stories like Sarah and Hagar, there's a lot of pain in that story. So not every biblical example that we read about is encouraging in a way that we just pick up our shields and we go running forward. And it's a time to learn and to absorb, who am I right now? And who
But
does
it
God want me to
encourages
be?
us because they have gone through stuff. Everyone in this world is going through something,
Right.
you know. So it does encourage no one's, and that they're not perfect, and it helps with our shortcomings. When we think about it, before when growing up, the pastors, everyone, they never talked about their shortcomings, and we put them in a higher pedestal. So now that it's a different light, that the truth comes out, it's like, okay, so they're just battling just like me, you know
Right.
and it gives you hope that you don't feel like, what's wrong with me, when everyone has this battle. The word says that we're all in a battle.
Yes. Yes.
And God still said about David, he said, he's a man after my own heart. Him and Paul are two of the people that I look to and I say, okay, they did some bad stuff. And I said, well, if God loved them, he can love me.
Right.
In our shortcomings.
Yeah, because I said that was bad. He killed all those Christians.
But what is unfortunate is that some of us are looked upon with our shortcomings as being horrible people, when everybody has a shortcoming no matter what.
Yes.
And as long as we ask God for forgiveness, it will be done. But it's man that's not forgiving us. But in our heart, as we know that God is saying, I forgive you for whatever shortcomings you have, and we just continue to pray to ask God for that forgiveness, we should feel in our hearts that we are forgiven. And what other people don't want to forgive us for whatever discretion or whatever, that's on them. But as long as we know that God is forgiving us, that's where we should be coming much more comfortable with our Christian selves.
Right, because he does say, judge not or you'll be judged.
Amen.
Right?
Amen.
I love the
So,
rawness. Go ahead, Trevor.
okay, I was just going to say what I kind of took away, like kind of summarizing, like kind of always try to summarize it, make it more personalized for me, or that kind of relates to it, is that the lesson here is, first of all, David, even though he humbled himself, he was blessing Abigail's husband. So that stood out to me that, you know, if you are approaching someone or going into a situation, it's all about, like you said, timing, but it's also your words. How are you choosing your words? How are you talking to that person? And the same with Abigail. She was so careful in what she did and how she fell to her feet, and my Lord, it's all about timing. And so if I even take this to my own personal relationships, it's like, okay, is this the right time to talk to my husband? All right. I know you might be irritated right now. You just got off of work. He's tired. So Lord, help me pick the right time that I can talk to him. Because as women, we want full undivided attention. Or for me, if you're not looking at me when I talk to you, I got a problem with that. That like gets under my skin. And so for my husband, that is not always him. He says, I'm listening, but he may not be looking you directly in the eye. So we kind of go back and forth with that. And I'm like, okay, pick your battles, pick your battles. It's all with timing and finding the right time. And I think as women, applying it to a marriage situation, it's learning that sweet spot with your mate of, okay, is this the right time? And I don't think that you're being sneaky. It's just, in this example, her husband was intoxicated, so she knew she couldn't, he would not have received, or whatever the case. It just wasn't a good time. So we got to learn maybe to ask God to guide us, to give us, the patience and the words and how to do things and everything in life. So I think that made the difference in the whole outcome of the situation.
So there's a couple things there, and you're completely right. One is don't reason with a fool, right? She could have gone back and tried to reason with her husband, but that already proved faulty. And two, I was sharing this earlier. You might not be responsible for what happens to you, but you're responsible for what you do next, right? And so that's where David's actions come in, because he responded to how Nabal treated him. And he responded in an ungodly manner.
It's like you always say, Jenny, it's how you react. He says, how am I going to react to this?
Yes, yes. I was saying earlier, like I said to someone, you can't choose where you're born, what your gender or ethnicity is. You can't choose any of that. But what do you do with this knowledge? What do you do with who you currently are? What do you do with your physical condition? You can't choose what happens, but what do you do next? Do you praise God? Do you blame God? Do you get angry? And you know what? We do get angry sometimes. We do have the moment of, I don't understand what's happening right now. And that is just honest.
We do get fleshy.
Of course we do.
Yeah.
And I love the rawness of the word. The word does not sugarcoat it. The word does not try to hide what happened. So we do have these examples of what imperfection and grace look like. We can all be recipients of grace.
But you said the word rawness, and that's where it runs deep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 I was explaining this to someone else that I was sharing about God's word with a couple weeks ago, while my niece was being born. And I said, the question was like, why is all this bad stuff in the Bible? And I said, so we know that there's room for us too. There's room for us too. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to try. Right? It's a little bit more than a participation trophy, I'd like to think. And that is the beauty of who, and the awesomeness of who our God is. He sees right to your heart. And I want you to consider what this life for Abigail must have been like, or could have been like. We only get a glimpse of it. She was married to a wealthy fool. We don't know for how long, but we know long enough that the people knew to come to her when there was a disturbance on the ground.
Not only wealthy, but wicked. It says wicked.
Wicked, right. But she did not lose her character because of who she was connected to. That's a message for some people right there.
And it gives you a message that pick your words. The way you deliver your words can create a battle or can have victory. You can lose or have the victory.
Right. Right.
Be very careful how you deliver your message. I think as women, we are careful with that.
Yeah. She was connected to someone really unbecoming. And it wasn't the money that mattered. Right? She cared about the lives of those men. Because guess what? She could have easily been like, well, I guess I'm done with the ball, because that'll fix that. If David goes and kills him and everybody else, I no longer have to be married to a fool, and I guess I inherit all of this. That is not how she responded. That would have solved one problem and created 5,000 more. And yet, not an ounce of blood was shed.
Amen.
Through her obedience, through her quick thinking. I'm sure there were plenty of prayers said through this time, because she was known as a prophetess. Everything that she spoke to David came to pass. She was prophesying about his future position as a king. She was prophesying about the result of those who sought his life. And she even prophesied about what would happen to her husband. So when things like this happen in your life and you don't understand, or even if you do understand how it got there, right? Because she understood how it got there through the reactions of her husband. As courageous women, as women of valor, it is our responsibility to act with discernment, to take the time to seek the Lord for what our next step is, for what our next word is. Because as you said, when we open our mouth, we let God speak through it. And that's what happened here. Her husband did not do that. Her husband spoke of his own folly. And David didn't even the way I picture it, he heard this word and he was like, everybody go get your stuff. And he just mounted up and marched on, and not another word was said. Like, he meant business. And so not only did she save those lives, but she stilled the pain inside him, because he was hurting. So I love the story of Abigail. She is, to me, the picture of a Proverbs 31 woman, along with Deborah, along with all the other women that we have been studying. And again, we're not seeking perfection in ourselves. We're seeking God to fill that gap. There's a difference. We are never going to be perfect without him, no matter how hard we try, no matter what surgery we have, no matter what alteration is there, no matter what lighting. But through God, we become whole. Through God, we have purpose. And through God, we have an image of who we are supposed to be as women, created in his likeness, as it says in Genesis. It's our responsibility to react to that, because that is what we have been given. And that is what we are in charge of.
So, Jenny, while we were talking and discussing this and I was listening, I was looking for a verse that I wanted to make sure that I quoted it correctly, because if not, I was going to paraphrase. But Proverbs 18:21, the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit.
Yes.
So, even with thinking about this interaction when David came and when she came back, there was power in those words, and power of life or death. Are you doing a blessing or are you doing a curse? With your tongue. And so I don't know, that verse spoke out to me, just that that's applicable to this as well.
Yeah, I love that. Because that's exactly what happened here. When Nabal spoke foolishness and death, that's what came hunting for him, right? Not just through David, but afterwards, when the word was given to him, and he was put into this paralyzed state and died. But when Abigail spoke life, everyone except Nabal, survived that encounter. So you bring up a perfect point. Who are we speaking life into? Who are we speaking life over? She blessed David. She blessed the life of him and everyone who was on his side. And in essence, she cursed those who were coming for his life. Yeah. And that was King Saul, who later died. And that was Nabal, who later died. His enemies did not stand, to include, unfortunately, his own son, when his son came to take his life. Heavy stuff. The responsibility is there, right? And it's not that it's difficult. We just need God to navigate through it. We seek his discernment. It seems like such a heavy job, but it really is God doing the heavy lifting. And we just need to be his instrument, as Abigail was. Any other thoughts on Abigail and this entire story of being married to a wicked, rich fool, and pretty much saving the lives of everybody in that town.
And the sad part about it is we don't know the history of how she became his wife.
Yeah.
We have no idea.
Usually, you know what happens is in these types of situations, your father marries you off to
Yeah.
somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and you have no say in the matter.
Well, I think we have the answer right there. Thank you, Lucy.
Mhm.
Nabal was rich and she was beautiful. And so her father probably said, thank you for this bride price. Here's my daughter. Yep.
I just think about the parents who named him.
So there's a discussion about that, right? Don't name your kids Fool, right? But we don't know if this was a birth name or an acquired name. And that's the other harshness of it. Like, were you just known as a fool because you were so wicked? And everybody has these these nicknames, right? So did this become a nickname that he accepted because he didn't care? You can call me a fool all you want because I'm rich and you're still going to work for me. So it doesn't matter what you call me. We don't know the answer to that. But she says, as he was rightly named Nabal, so is his actions are fool. Right. Yep. That's harsh. But again, what did she have to endure as his wife?
Mm.
I don't even want to imagine that. And that is something that him too, that the Bible doesn't allude to, because the focus is on her godly response, her interaction with David, and then her future as his wife. And she goes from being provided for and cared for by a wicked man, and I wouldn't even say cared for, right? But then becoming the spouse of someone who was after God's own heart. And that had to be a great transition for her. Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this chapter and how it relates to the last 9 weeks of God's timing and even God's timing in our own lives? As sometimes I know that I can be really impatient. As I said, I've called the VA hotline probably a million times each day. But, looking for God's hand to quiet the storm in our life, and trust in his grace and in his patience. And then there are times where God calls us to action and to respond.
Well, she gave us the perfect example on how to quiet the storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she definitely did. There was one more point that I wanted to bring out about her and this timing, because again, timing is everything. She didn't put it in somebody else's hands. She didn't say, here, take this to David. I'm going to stay clear out of this mess. Because she sent 5 other people with her, right? And loaded the 5 other donkeys with all that food. She didn't say, I'm going to stay here. You let me know how that works out. If you return and he doesn't kill you, then I know it's okay.
Yeah, she wasn't protecting herself.
She wasn't protecting herself. Completely self-sacrificial.
She got to make sure that job gets done correctly.
Well, that's
and
a lot of us.
bestow on him the honor that you're just not sending your servants, you're humbling yourself before him. You came yourself, you honored him with your presence, so to speak.
Yeah. That's that wisdom and discernment. So if I can ask you guys to pray for anything this week, it is for wisdom, knowledge, and discernment. Yeah. Because that makes all the difference. And that when you speak to others, as we talked about before, some of you join on, you speak to them as if you were talking to Jesus, with patience and humility.
Wisdom is more precious than rubies, right?
Yeah. Right. And a woman of valor is worth far more than rubies. So incorporate the two in your week. as I encourage you to seek God in every bit of your day, as long as these days have been, just know that God's hand is in your life. And as it was protecting every one of these men, God will send an ambassador for you when you can't step in. So, and that's what Jesus became to us, an ambassador. And now we represent him on this earth. So in representing who Christ is, and the women that we were created to be, do we meet people with humility and grace and love and kindness and selflessness and patience? Or are we quick to anger? Are we quick to react? Do we draw people in by whispering, or do we push people away by yelling? Definitely guilty of all of that at some point in my life. And I'll see how tomorrow works out, right?
I might be guilty of some of that yesterday.
Right. A bad bout of traffic might bring it out of some people. But
Oh
but
God.
but
Thank God
but
for his mercy.
yes, and that's the other thing, like exercising that grace and favor, because when you mess up, what does it say? Righteous man falls down how many times and gets back up? 70 times.
1,000 times.
Right? 1,000,000 times. And the difference between somebody who is constantly sinning and then, throwing in my bad, versus somebody who is recognizing that, man, I messed up, is that repentant heart. So it's okay to mess up. You're muted, Diane.
They know they can get back right up with God each time they get up, as long as they believe it.
Right.
He knows your heart. But like some people say, oh, my bad, I'll just go and I remember this so vividly when they say, oh, my bad, I'll just pray about it tomorrow. And it's like, really, it's like you're taking him for a joke or something. Yeah. I says, no, that's not the way.
Yep. So that is all I have on Abigail. If there's anything else that you guys want to speak about or share or talk about, how this really made you think. I know this story made me think as I was going through it and being encouraged by every one of her actions.
Where was she in Numbers? You said you saw her in Numbers.
She is there listing as a wife of David when they're talking about his descendants.
Oh.
Yeah. She gives birth to one of his sons, his second son.
Oh, right.
It would be in Numbers.
It would be in Numbers, yes. Yes. So yeah, I love the story of Abigail. It is completely encouraging, and it is a blueprint of how we are supposed to act, even when we're in horrible circumstances, being tied to wicked people. She couldn't help that she was tied to Nabal. That was a decision that was made for her, but that didn't change her character away from God. She stayed true to who she was. She stayed true to her faith in the Lord. And so you can be tied to the worst person in the world, but you're responsible for how you act and how you respond and what your words are. And so, when you have two people coming together, there's going to be some change, right? You either change like them or they change like you, or some kind of meshing in the middle. She didn't change who she was being tied to this wickedness. And obviously he didn't get any grace from her either. So.
Just that word came to me, work out your own salvation. Because it was her salvation, and her character. And even though she was married to a wicked person, a fool, her relationship was, with God.
Yeah. Steadfast. She delivered God's word, and again, all about timing. She didn't delay. And so that's another thing to take away. When God gives you an assignment, do not delay. Whole lives may be at stake. Yep.
Very good. Very good study on Abigail.
I definitely enjoyed it. So let's go into prayer requests.